Good morning, everybody. Today I am going to be installing the Banks Ram Air intake kit on my 2017 Chevy Silverado 2500 HD. I'm going to try to show you as much of this as I can. First step, since we're going to be disconnecting any electrical sensors, the intake air temperature sensor here, we're going to disconnect the negative terminals of both batteries, one on this side, one on the other side, and get all these hose clamps loosened up to make it easier to get the factory intake kit out. And then I'll check back in with you once I get that done. Alright, everybody, so we got the negative off on this side. Got the negative off on this side. Those both take a 10mm socket. I've loosened all the hose clamps using a flathead screwdriver. The instructions give you the option. You can keep this resonator or you can remove it. The main idea behind the resonator is it helps to quiet the engine down a little bit and remove some of the turbo noise. I like turbo noise, so I'm going to be taking the resonator off. To do that, it's the hose clamp right here, and then you have a 13mm socket right back here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull all these parts out. When you're ready to disconnect your intake air temperature sensor, you push the little red piece out, push down on the black tab, and then it slides right off. And just tuck that back out of your way. Be very careful with your intake air temperature sensor. You don't want to get it wet or dirty or bang it around on stuff while you're moving it out of here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull all these pieces out and then check back in. Okay, so we've got the factory intake plumbing pulled out of the way. We've got our mass air sensor disconnected. The next step is, if you look right down here, this tie holds your mass airflow sensor wiring. This tie right here holds a coolant line. I have this super handy little tool that you can slide in underneath, and it makes it much easier to pry these little, the little Christmas tree style clips out of your way. So we got that one out. We got the coolant line one out. There we go. So now the only thing holding your air box in is rubber grommets that plug into the airbox mounting base. So you can try to do it. I'm going to have to get both hands, so I'll check back once I've got this out. Alright, we're moving right along. So the next step is to remove your factory airbox tray. You can see right here and right here where the two rubber grommets that hold the factory airbox in place, there's 4 10mm bolts. 2, 3, 4. And loosen those up, and then your tray should lift right out. Easy peasy. Okay? Once you have your tray out, you can start moving parts over from your factory airbox to your Banks intake kit. So the first thing right here is your mass airflow sensor that uses a T20 Torx bit. And it's only hand tight. Should be pretty easy to get those screws out. Line it up. Just back those out. Now Banks provides in their kit a set of Phillips head screws. Gently pull your mass airflow sensor out, and then you slide it right in, and you can see the Banks intake has brass thread inserts, whereas it just threaded into plastic in the factory box. So once you slide your mass airflow sensor in all the way down, seated, Banks provides 2 Phillips head screws to use with their intake. So you just tighten those down. This is really hard to do with one hand. Get that one in there. Tighten that one down. And remember, this is a pretty sensitive sensor. So you want to just go snug it down till it seals, but you're not trying to put 100 foot-pounds of torque on this. You don't want to damage your intake housing. You don't want to damage your mass airflow sensor. So I believe the next step we'll start putting the Banks ram air box together and then get that mounted in the truck. I'll show you once I get going on that. Okay, so the next step is to put your gasket, your seals, along the upper track where your hood intake connects to the air box, and along the outside here where the box pulls air in from the fender well. It's also open at the bottom, you can see here. And this side is where your filter goes in and out, and also where your intake tube will connect over to there. This stuff is pretty much impossible to do one-handed, so I'm going to get these going. Once you have your gaskets put back on, your air box comes, you'll sit it down into where the factory box was, and then you bolt it in using the 4 factory bolts. And just go through into the 4 holes here in your intake box. And once I get all that done, I'll show you. Okay, everybody, so we've got the air box. It's just sitting back down in place here. Got the weather stripping on the upper part installed. I don't know if you can see it down there. We've got the weather stripping of the fender mating surface installed. You have to trim this. Well, you may need to trim this to be the right size. I used a pair of side angle cutters. There is metal inside of this. That's what makes it hold onto the box and stay in place. So a pair of side angle cutters works really well. And just another tip before I put these bolts in, it takes a little finagling to get your bolt holes lined up with the factory box holes. And anything that I plan on taking apart or may need to take apart in the future, I always put just a dab of anti-seize on. I mean, it literally, oh, that's all you need. That's actually more than enough. But especially if you're going to be in a climate where there's rust or a lot of humidity, that anti-seize makes it way easier to get things apart again in the future if you need to. So anything I think I might need to get back into again, a little bit of anti-seize. Okay, so we've got our air intake box bolted down securely. We use the 4 stock air box bolts to hold it down. One other quick tip: anytime you're installing multiple bolts to hold down one thing, start all of your bolts before you tighten any of them. So there's 4 in this one. I got all 4 bolts started into the threads before I tightened any. It makes it so much easier to get everything lined up and get things in place. You're not fighting with the intake box trying to get the bolt holes lined up as much. So the next step is we need to get our filter attached to our intake tube. Banks provides you with this great big hose clamp. Another tip about hose clamps in general: try to point the part where your screwdriver goes in a direction that's going to be easy or convenient for you to access. So I know the tube goes in just like so in the filter, and then it slides into that air box. So I really want my screwdriver slot pointed this way. That's going to make it easier for me to tighten or loosen it without removing everything from the truck if I need to. So I'm going to get these stuck together. The other part of this step is getting your adapter sleeve onto the intake tube as well. Your little notch in the intake tube lines up with the white arrow on the sleeve, and then you'll use another hose clamp to get that tightened together as well. So once I get those done, I'll show you. Okay, everybody, so we're getting close here. I've got my filter attached to the intake tube. I've got the silicone boot attached to the intake tube as well. I've snugged down this hose clamp and this hose clamp to make sure things are in place. My mass airflow sensor is snug down. I really like to keep things, you know, tidy and looking the way they should. So these little clips that we took off from the factory air box, we are not going to use with the Banks kit. There's nowhere for them to attach into. So I'm just going to use my angle cutters to just clip them off of the coolant hose here and the wire harness for the mass airflow sensor. And once I do that, then I will stick the intake in place. The filter goes down into the air box like so, and then the coupler attaches on this side, and I'll show you when I get done. Okay, everybody, so air filter, air cleaner box is securely mounted, all bolted down. The air filter is inside of there. We've got the intake tube hose clamped to the air filter, runs all the way over. The silicone connector is tight on both the intake tube and the turbo inlet. And then last step up here is to reconnect the intake air temperature sensor. Slide it over, push the red lock. Another important tip is when you do anything like this, you want to make sure that you're not going to have your wires or anything, especially since we relocated this harness for the intake air sensor and this coolant line. You want to make sure that they're not rubbing against anything that might chafe through, damage a wire, or cause a leak. And this is all, mine's all in good shape. It's not rubbing on anything. So the last step now, I'm going to double check everything, make sure I didn't miss anything, reconnect the negative battery terminals, and start it up. Alright, so here we go. First start up since putting the Banks ram air on. There we go. And everything looks good inside. Everything looks good up here. Everything nice and secure. It does sound like it has just a tiny bit more intake grumble to it, but otherwise, it really sounds the same. I'll let you know how it feels on the road. Thanks for watching, guys.